Warning, the following video will contain spoilers for Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Minor spoilers will be throughout, but major spoilers will get its own section of the video, so don't say you weren't warned if you decide to stick around. World building is one of my favorite aspects of storytelling in any form of media. Characters may be the heart and soul of any story as well as its overall writing, but nothing draws me into a game more than an interesting setting. This is one of the many reasons I love RPGs so much, since you can do so much with them in terms of the kind of world you can have it take place in. So when I saw the world and premise of Xenoblade Chronicles 1, I was immediately drawn in and had the pleasure of experiencing what is probably the most finely crafted and well thought out story I've seen in a game. There are a lot of reasons why I love the Xenoblade Chronicles series, aside from its world and story, and that was the initial reason why I wanted to do a marathon of these games. Keyword here being initial. Yeah, much to my surprise, while I was halfway through the game, Monolith Soft decided to take the time during the February Nintendo Direct to announce the release of the third numbered installment in the series, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And if you watched my hype video on it, you can already tell that I'm more than excited for it. So, starting with the original, let's take a look at the whole series and see how it's improved over time. To be honest, I haven't played the original in years, so aside from the story, I'm actually pretty interested to see how I feel about its gameplay after so long, especially after a recent playthrough of Chronicles 2, as well as Torn of the Golden Country. Without any further delays though, we can kick this marathon off with the definitive version of Xenoblade Chronicles 1. Let's get started. So, when you think of a sci-fi RPG, what kind of setting would first come to mind? An alien world foreign to our protagonist? A fictional solar system with its own unique cultures? Maybe an alternate dimension even? Xenoblade Chronicles does something very different, and instead of taking place on some alien world, it takes place on an infinite ocean, with the only land masses life can live on being the bodies of two dead titans, the Bionis and Mechonis. The game opens up showing that the Bionis' inhabitants, the Homs, are at war with the Mechon, an army of robots with armor so durable, most weaponry can't so much as scratch it, with the exception of the Monado, a weapon supposedly wielded by the Bionis itself in its battle with the Mechonis thousands of years ago. A year after their defeat at the hands of the Monado's current wielder, Dunban, the Mechon attack Colony 9 with the new Faced Mechon that are mysteriously immune to the Monado, and in a very surprising move, they kill off one of your party members and the main character's love interest, like, not even 2 hours into the game. I said it when I first played this game and stand by it years later. Xenoblade Chronicles 1 has easily one of, if not the strongest set of opening hours in a JRPG I've ever seen. For a lot of other JRPGs, they can have problems with having a slow start, either because of something as simple as poor writing, or that they just have a lot to set up for its narrative. The opening battle at Sword Valley not only very quickly sets up for the player the main enemies you're going to be dealing with for a majority of your adventure, and the scale of the world as well as how it first presents itself does a great job at helping to grab the player immediately. In the event that wasn't enough for you though, the attack on Colony 9 might have been where the game finally grabbed you, with the pretty nice subversion of expectations with Fiora's death, and the absolutely wonderful cinematography of the scene in question, which is made even better by Adam Howden's absolutely brilliant performance as Shulk. I can't sing the praises of Xenoblade Chronicles beginning chapters enough. The guys at Monolith succeeded in creating the strongest start to a JRPG I've ever seen, and even though I find myself liking later entries more, this is one of the few things I can't say the other games in the series do quite as well as the first one. Now, the original Wii version of the game is already plenty beautiful despite the weaker technology it was on, but with the game's definitive edition, everything in the game has been remastered and remade to make use of the Switch's stronger technology, making a game that was already good looking before even more beautiful. Like, seriously, Xenoblade Chronicles is pure eye candy. The game's expansive environments are easily one of the game's strongest points in regards to its visuals. Satoral Marsh at Night's Aurora Mist is somehow even prettier than what it was in the Wii version. Machna Falls is just as awe-inspiring as before, and Valak Mountain at night is just amazing. You know, for as much of a pain as it is to slog through, this is easily one of my favorite snow areas in a game ever. I could look at this view all day. I mean, I almost feel like the developers make it their mission to have as much gorgeous scenery as they can in this series, because it's not only one of the things every game in the series so far does very well, but the game's secret areas seem like the developers' way of throwing in some extra eye candy, cause goodbye Giannis are some of these amazing to look at. The game's environments weren't the only thing that got a nice touch-up though. The game's UI and menus got changed to make them look cleaner, and in the case with combat, smaller, so that the character portraits and the arts panels don't take up as much room as it did in the original, which is one of many very welcome adjustments made in the definitive edition. The models of all the characters and enemies were completely remade as well, with a different art style that allows them to be far more expressive than what they were in the original version of the game. Now, when it comes to a game's graphics, I don't usually care how good or bad they are. I care enough to point out when a game could look better, or if it has graphical issues like pop-in or poor draw distance, but I don't care enough for it to realistically affect my overall opinion of a game at the end of the day. With that being said though, I'm so glad they made them better, because while it didn't bother me in the original, the more expressive and emotive models helped to make some of the more emotionally intense scenes in the game hit the littlest bit harder. And on the subject of scenes hitting harder, let's talk about the remastered soundtrack, because as you can imagine, they nailed that one too. Every track in the game got remastered for the Switch version, and honestly, they're all pretty good. I don't think there's a single one I dislike, with some of my favorite tracks being Valley Mountain's theme for being so tranquil, making a beautiful environment even more nice to travel through, and Unfinished Battle for being an absolutely amazing piece of music that is criminally only played once in the entire game for reasons I will never know or understand. Honestly, the remastered version is so good it actually improved one of the tracks for me, specifically one Who Gets in Our Way. It was a fine enough song in the original, but it could get pretty repetitive with its opening 10-15 seconds, and this new version does a great job of alleviating that. The only theme in the game I'm still not too fond of is the normal battle theme. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, it's just kind of very okay for me. And after getting to Mechonis and listening to its normal battle theme, it made me really wish I could just listen to the latter instead, because it's just so much better for me. Beyond that, there isn't a single piece of music I don't enjoy. I seriously can't praise the remastered presentation enough. The guys at Monolith did a bang-up job smoothing out the Wii version's rougher edges. For the most part, because on a purely mechanical level, Chronicles 1 is kinda rough for me, especially compared to later games in the series. Now, I feel like I should say up front that I don't dislike Xenoblade Chronicles gameplay at all. I actually think it's a lot of fun, even if it is weirdly simple to me at points. There's just certain areas of the game that either felt lacking to me, or I wasn't exactly keen on. The combat, though, is for the most part not one of these things, because Xenoblade Chronicles has a pretty unique and mostly solid battle system. The gameplay is like a fusion between an MMO and a single-player RPG, with you needing to pay attention to the position of whatever character you're playing as in combat because of their arts. Let's take Shulk for example. He has two arts that have a bonus effect when you use it on an enemy's side. Slit Edge, which briefly lowers an enemy's physical defense, and Air Slash, which inflicts slow on an enemy. He also has the ever-reliable Backslash, which when combined with Slit Edge can do some really strong damage. While it's a little different for every party member in the game, they all have MMO traits in how you use them, and it makes every character unique and interesting in some capacity, combat-wise. With that being said though, I went ahead and just used Shulk for a vast majority of my playthrough, because when it comes to RPGs, I usually just stick to the main character. On the subject of our protagonist though, it's through him we get the most interesting element of both the combat and gameplay as a whole, the visions. Starting with how it affects combat, sometimes mid-battle you'll get a vision showing off an enemy's next attack and how much damage it'll do. This gives you the chance to change the future with one of Shulk's various Monado arts, or by dazing them, but that's something we'll get more into in a bit. All of Shulk's Monado arts will be useful every now and then, but excluding the attacking Monado arts, the ones you'll probably use the most is Monado Shield and Monado Enchant. Monado Shield for its ability to block an enemy's talent art, provided you've leveled it up enough, and Monado Enchant for its ability to let other party members hit mech on. As for the ones I use the least, I'm pretty sure I only ever use Monado Speed, like, once? Honestly, I don't even have a reason why. I just was never in a position where I needed to use it as far as I remember. Okay, so I may not have used this one very much in the base game, but the optional Monado art, Monado Armor, is extremely good, especially when upgraded, since it reduces both physical and ether damage for 15 seconds, and is Shulk's only way of dealing with an enemy's ether art without dazing them. On the offensive front though, Monado Buster is a very reliable attack to use if you just want to hit the enemy really hard, especially if that enemy is a Mechon, since Monado Buster does double damage against them. Monado Purge, on the other hand, is 100% going to be your best freaking friend against any enemy with an aura or spike. Auras are just simple buffs to an enemy that can range from increasing their damage to raising their evasion rate, but spikes, on the other hand, are a completely different story. If an enemy has a spike or aura active, they'll have a wave symbol on their name tag, and spikes can either deal continuous damage to party members or give debuffs, and some of these can be pretty nasty, especially when it's a topple spike. Because unless you already know about it going into the fight, you have no way of knowing an enemy has one. The spikes are a mechanic I'm honestly glad were used less into, because I'm really not a fan of them. And it's really primarily because, beyond Shulk's Monado Purge, your only way of dealing with spikes, as far as I'm aware, is spike defense gems and auto-healing gems. And in the case with topple spikes, like I said before, you have no way of knowing if an enemy has one without either having fought it first or googling it. They're not terrible by any means, I just don't like them that much. On the subject of things I don't like that much mechanically though, let's talk chain attacks. When your party gauge is full, you can initiate a chain attack, and for the most part, they're really fun to use, as it's a good way to get a break, topple, and daze combo off easily, especially since some enemies have a resistance to break outside of chain attacks. The problem I have though is the fact that chain attacks have a big element of RNG to them. After your third attack, it'll be pretty much random chance whether or not you get another attack after that point, with that chance being influenced based on how high your tension is, as well as the character's affinity with any other character in the party. So while they're a great way to get a quick combo off, especially if you have an oncoming vision, since daze can break visions, they're a little unreliable in the damage department. Though that may not matter that much in the grand scheme of things, cause wow is topple locking an overpowered strategy. Seriously, if you can get a good rhythm going, you can turn some encounters into an absolute joke. Cause I've had moments where in the late game, I've been able to keep an enemy on the ground for like a good 30 seconds as I just beat the crap out of them the entire time. It's both hilarious and honestly really sad at points. I mean seriously, if this thing wasn't a lifeless machine, I might actually feel really bad about this. Okay, so before we move on to the other half of the gameplay and the place where most of my issues lie, we gotta talk about the gunner in the room. Charlotte is easily the worst character in the game on a combat level, and I can't understand why the designers made some of the choices they did with her. The first and most basic problem is that her auto attack is weirdly slower than anyone else's. Like, in the time it takes for someone like Shulk or Dunban to do 2 or 3 attacks, Charlotte will have done 1 attack. Adding on to that, she has an unfortunately small pool of offensive arts. Like, I get that she's supposed to be your healer, but with how a lot of the inner workings of Xenoblade 1's combat function, this lack of attacking arts really cripples Charla, making it so that while she's really good at keeping you alive longer, she will, ironically enough, make fights themselves take longer. Then there's her talent art, which is by far the most crippling thing about her. You see, every character in the game will have a special art that they can use after they do enough auto attacks, but for Charla, hers kicks in after she uses enough arts. Once her talent gauge is full, she will have to stop for about 8 to 10 seconds to cool off her rifle, leaving her a sitting duck in the meanwhile. Like, honestly, if they had just given her a good talent art, it could have made up for everything else. In regards to anything that isn't strictly combat though, that's where things get a little rough for me. Let's actually go ahead and talk about the game's areas, because while I stand by the fact that they're gorgeous, they are very boring mechanically. The problem is twofold. First off, in terms of exploration, beyond the game's unique monsters, landmarks, and item orbs, there's not much to actually find that isn't either pointed out to you on the map or a red item orb that you'll need for like 1 quest and 1 quest only. Now, this wouldn't necessarily be an issue if it wasn't for the fact that a lot of places in this game are built way too big, making it take longer than it should to get from point A to B. Fast travel is an option, but they can be weirdly stingy with it in some places, like Tawagora Shore in Colony 9 doesn't have a landmark, meaning you have to take the time to swim over there at any point you need to. The weakest areas for me have to be Makanis Field and Makanis Central Factory, purely because it's another 2 areas of nothing but Mechon after we already had Sword Valley and Galahad Fortress. By the time I got to Agniratha, I had gone through 5 areas of almost nothing but Mechon, and I just got really sick of fighting these guys, because they all look and fight virtually the same. You know what, to give some credit though, at the very least the Collectopedia for you to fill out, which is admittedly very satisfying and fun to do, so I have to give them that much, even if I do admittedly hate how the item orbs are completely random with what's in them. Actually, on that note though, it's time we addressed the most widely criticized thing about the game. It's side quests, and yeah, these ain't great. You see, I think the problem with the side quests can be boiled down to the design team taking a quantity over quality approach to making them. Now, that's not to say all of them are bad or boring. A few of them are genuinely really good, and some of them even have interesting stories attached to them. The problem is that even the ones that do have said interesting stories usually have the same problem like 80% of the other quests do: your objective. Most side quests in Xenoblade Chronicles can be boiled down to either a fetch quest or kill X amount of enemies. And because there are well over 400 side quests in the game, they get boring and repetitive very quickly, and it makes a second playthrough for me kinda hard, especially because the game's balanced with you having done most of these in mind. Okay, so I'm gonna have to spoil a moment in the game to back this point up, so spoilers are in effect for the rest of the video. Skip to here if you want to avoid that. Anyway though, in the final battle with Egil, the game's balanced so that if you're like me and you did most of the quests you could have done up to that point, you'll either be even leveled or just slightly lower level than him, meaning the designers intended for you to at least do most of them. It's also important to do these because interacting with named NPCs that have a side quest grants extra affinity for active party members, which is useful for the game's scaling system as well as unlocking higher tiers of heart-to-hearts for other characters. So that gives you even more reason to not skip these. At the very least, the rebuilding of Colony 6 is pretty satisfying, even if getting some of these items for it is kind of annoying, and the fact that Future Sight can give you a heads up when you find a collectible you need for a future side quest, and how much you'll need of it, is pretty cool. Actually, on the note of collecting items, let's talk about new additions, because Definitive Edition does more than give the game a nice facelift. In the new version of the game, any quest that involves you getting a certain number of collectibles will mark what item orbs are currently spawned on the map that are the item you need, and can I just say, thank Bionis they added this, because from what I remember of the original, some of these were annoying, like the quest asking you to get 2 rainbows or chronias. God, it took forever to find those in the original, and they even do this for the red item orbs too, which is also just as welcome so you're not looking for a needle in an island-sized haystack. Adding on to welcome new additions, we have something from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the Event Gallery. Here you can view heart-to-hearts again, so you can see some of those other branching paths you didn't see, as well as any voiced cutscene. And let me tell you, this addition saved this video from a 6th delay. Okay, so quick behind-the-scenes thing here. Halfway through playing the game back in, like, February, my computer broke down. And to make a long story short, it took over 2.5 months to get a new and much better computer. And unfortunately, at some point, I lost well over 35 hours of footage from this game, so every bit of progress made, all the way up to Sword Valley and Galahad Fortress, was lost. The fact that this feature is here meant I didn't have to take another week to re-record the entire first half of the game to get the cutscenes. You know, it's weird. I remember there being another thing they added to the Definitive Edition, but I can't quite put my finger on it. I'm pretty sure it started with a T, right? Torna? No, that was Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Oh, that's right, I remember now. It was Future Connected, the new epilogue game. How could I have forgotten about that? It was one of Definitive Edition's biggest selling points. Anyway though, I'm actually going to give Future Connected its own video, since if I talked about it here, I'd make this video way longer than it needs to be. Which leaves only one more thing to talk about. No matter what I say about anything else involving this series going forward, no matter what I've said about this specific entry, the one thing that will always remain true is that Xenoblade Chronicles has one of the most finely crafted stories I've ever seen in an RPG. It starts off as a simple quest for revenge, but slowly over time, the truth about the situation slowly starts to reveal itself in some of the most brilliant foreshadowing I've ever seen. Like the scene where Shulk is talking with Rein, and he says there's a voice telling him to destroy the Mechon. On a first playthrough, you won't think anything of this line. After all, given what happened previously, wouldn't anyone feel the same? But no, the game from the very start effectively tells you that the game's main antagonist, Zanza, is present in Shulk right from the beginning, but with none of the context needed to put it together. Or at Prison Island, when Giant Zanza releases the Minato shackles and says nothing but a god can stop him now, spelling out Giant Zanza's true nature. One of my favorite subtle bits of storytelling, though, is at Machna Forest when Shulk encounters the Telethia spawn. You may not put it together immediately, but when you come back to this scene knowing that the High Entia are just Telethia in a weaker state, you may realize that the ones Shulk fought were the guards Melia had with her that changed after their encounter with the big Telethia. All of this is just talking about the game's excellent use of foreshadowing, though. That's not even talking about how well written of a protagonist Shulk is, or just how well written the entire game is, honestly. Now, I could try and go into great length about how well Xenoblade Chronicles executes its themes, like how nothing is set in stone, and how it's up to you to seize your own destiny, or stepping up and breaking the cycle of hatred, because all it does is continuously break people. But honestly, I don't think I'd be able to do Xenoblade Chronicles justice in that regard, since the story of Chronicles 1 isn't something I feel confident about trying to analyze. If you're wanting like the best deep dive and analysis of Xenoblade Chronicles as a whole, themes included, I'd recommend checking out Cynical's video, Xenoblade Chronicles Critique of Gods and Hans. It's a 4.5-hour behemoth of a video, but it's probably the most thorough examination of a video game I've ever seen. Make that the second most thorough examination of a game I've ever seen. That being said though, for as much as I love the story, it's definitely not perfect. Most of my complaints are either nitpicks or pretty minor in the grand scheme of things for me, so let's start with those. Specifically with Mumkar. Okay, so was it not weird to anyone that they never explained why he didn't speak in the attack on Colony 9? Like, on a narrative level, I get it, if he spoke that early in the game, the player would be able to figure out the twist too quick, but on an in-universe level, why doesn't he say anything? I mean, they do a wonderful job showing off his personality through his body language, but knowing the kind of grade-A scumbag Mumkar is, you'd think he'd be ready with some sick insults for Dunban. Honestly, the explanation could have been as simple as, he left his mic on mute without realizing it, and that would have been enough for me, so long as I was given a reason. Secondly, let's talk about the vision Shulk gets that tells him to head off to Prison Island. My nitpick here is that if Shulk is seeing the vision the way we, the player, are seeing it, is it not odd he doesn't point out that there seems to be something inside the faced Mechon? Now, I am not saying he should automatically jump to there being Homs in the faces. That would be way too big a leap in logic for him to make this early in the game. I'm just saying it's strange it's not really acknowledged that there's a vaguely person-shaped thing inside the Mechon. Now, in terms of characters, I don't dislike any of them, but some are definitely stronger than others. Starting with our main cast, a few of them, unfortunately, don't get anywhere near as much character development as what Shulk and Best Girl Melia get, and it really shows with some of them. Ryan is good, what with him being probably the best example of the best friend archetype I've seen. He's the kind of friend that's always there when you need him, and he's more than willing to call you out for your bullcrap. Dunban, that fine male specimen he is, gets some great scenes and is always a joy to listen to, what with the smooth voice of his. As a whole, he's probably one of my favorite characters in the game, due in large part to just how much suave awesomeness this guy radiates. Fiora... Oh, this is where it goes downhill a little. See, Fiora's not bad at all. She's perfectly fine. She just doesn't have much going for her other than a nice personality. Her actual role in the story, with her not only being the catalyst for the adventure, but also the reason Shulk starts singing a different tune, is great, but beyond that, I don't have much to say about her. She's the childhood friend and love interest of Shulk, and that's about it. Charla, I feel, is a good character that unfortunately loses some relevance for a while in the story after she helps Melia in Machna Forest. She has a serviceable enough arc in the story, but it takes until Makanis Field for that to really start, which is like the 70% marker for the game. On the subject of relevance issues though, let's talk about Ricky, cause well, I love the little furball. He has like next to no importance in the story. He admittedly does have 2 really good scenes, but I mean beyond that, not much else. I mean, his entire motivation for helping end a potentially world-ending war, and then a plot devised by an arrogant god with a very twisted idea of friendship, and subsequently then aiding in deicide, other than his friendship with the main party, was to pay for his kid's food bill. I tell you what, his little pawn better be grateful. I can't imagine most fathers would be willing to genuinely go out of their way to kill God so their kids can eat. You know what, I will say though, is Heart with Shulk, where he offers to adopt him the second he finds out Shulk's an orphan, is incredibly sweet. My headcanon will always be that Shulk and Ricky got those adoption papers signed after they killed Zanza. And actually, on the note of everyone's favorite arrogant god, let's talk about Zanza, because while he's an amazing element of the plot, he's definitely not an amazingly written character. The biggest problem with him is that he doesn't really get much development as a character, and because of that, he feels less like a person, and more like just some plot twist in the shape of one. I have a hard time believing Zanza truly longed for friendship like Alvis claims when nothing about his actions seems to line up with that. Per Shulk, it feels more like he wanted slaves than actual friends, and I can't help but feel if we just spent more time with Zanza as a character, and less as an obstacle, he would have made for a better villain for me. Now, as for any major complaints I only have 3. Let's start with the quick and easy ones first. Makanis Core feels way too small, and really should have been more of its own area, because the pacing at this part of the story is weirdly fast. And Dixon's line, "I feel kinda bad about deceiving those kids," is way too heavy foreshadowing for the fact that he reveals himself to be in league with the main bad guy. Now, let's talk about the story beats on Bionis Leg, cause I just got one question. Whose stupid pills is this kid ODing on? And if they're his, who's the moron that gave them to him? Cause his actions for this part of the story are unjustifiably dumb. Like, okay, I get it, he really wants to take back his colony from the Mechon, but why on my honest did he think charging into the military base full of the heavily armed, virtually indestructible, actual man-eating robots was a good idea? Especially when he charged in, or should I say, tried to charge in, without anything resembling a weapon to fight them off with. Yes, I understand that people often do stupid things when they're angry, but this isn't just anger-fueled stupidity, this is a complete lack of self-preservation. Here's the thing, I don't really hate Juju at all, I just hate how he was incredibly stupid because the plot needed him to be. Poor kid was done dirty. Xenoblade Chronicles 1 may not be my favorite in the series, but I can easily see why it would be someone else's. The gameplay, well, fairly simple, is a lot of fun and fairly unique for a JRPG, and the future sight mechanic was a really nice touch in the gameplay that helped to sell a lot of the game's central themes. And like I said, while the story's not perfect, it's incredibly well crafted and has easily some of the best foreshadowing I've seen in any story. But it definitely has its rough edges for me, with things like how bare exploration is and the mostly uninspired side quests hampering the game's replayability. Beyond that though, we've still got one more thing to talk about before we move on to the next major game in the series, like I said earlier in the video. So next time, we'll be looking at the epilogue chapter for the game, Xenoblade Chronicles Future Connected, and maybe this time it won't take like 3 months to upload. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.